was born in Little Rock, Arkansas, St. Vincent's Hospital, at late July 30th in 19... And my birth mother was the eldest of three girls. There was Marilyn, Marjorie, and Marcia. And Marilyn was the oldest of the three girls. Marilyn was a bit of a putana. It was during the Depression, and she was a Depression baby coming out of that. They moved from Georgia to Arkansas because they ran out of money, and like everybody else during that period of time. And I was unaware of who my birth father was, my sperm donor, because the gentleman whose name is on my birth certificate is not my birth father, which I found out due to my husband's insistence on doing my DNA. 83 years later, I found my birth father, and I have a half sister, but I'll go back. My birth mother was killed in a car accident when I was 2.5 years old. She was 19 at the time. And since I didn't have a father, a legitimate father, her parents, who were my grandparents, my grandmother and my grandfather, took me in and raised me as their own. They adopted me when I was 5 years old, legally, and I was raised as their son and as the brother of my birth mother's sisters, Marilyn and Margie and Marcia. And that was my beginning. My grandparents were very, I just recently understood exactly the sacrifices that they made to take me in, and my grandfather especially, because my mother was his favorite child, the first daughter, and I was a constant reminder not only of her sin, but her death. I was still here and she wasn't. And I'm sure there had to be some kind of resentment. And he was very disciplined with me. I used to get spankings and every now and then a belt. That stopped eventually. But he was a very good man, very good man. He was into metaphysics later in his life, which gave us a bond. My mother, was a wonderful musician. She gave me the gift of music and singing and laughter and wonderful, wonderful times. And I have to credit her for pushing me into my business, which is the show business. My grandparents were in their 40s when I was born, so I was considered to be a late baby, I guess. My father was an accountant, and not a CPA, but an accountant. And he worked for Arkansas Foundry and Steel Company for years and years and years. He was a workaholic. He was always gone working. My mother was a stay-at-home mom, housekeeper, cook, mentor, mother, inspiration, encourager, provider, as both of them were. They were, my dad and I, he had a little side job in a barber shop, keeping books for the barber. And there was this little dingy office up in the vestibule of the office building, and it overlooked the hallway and stuff like that. A little single light bulb. And and that's where he would do his work. And I would go up there with him, and it would be a Saturday afternoon, and he would give me jobs to do, and he would turn on the Metropolitan Opera, and we would listen to the opera all Saturday afternoon while we did our work. So he had this great appreciation for music. He was not a talented man in that realm. He was talented in his metaphysical thinking. And he did pass that on to me, I think. And that eventually, as I said, was our major bond in our later life. My sisters, who were actually my aunts, were older than I. My sister Marjorie was 16 years older than I am. She was a year and a half younger than my birth mother, than Marilyn. And then Marcia Boo, who, I'll tell you about that name. Marcia was 8 years younger than Margie, and I was 8 years younger than Boo. And then my Margie's son was 7 years younger than me. So there's that closeness there. Margie was an accountant as well. She went into figures. Boo did the same thing. They followed in their father's footsteps. Margie ran off and got married as well when she was in her early 20s. Married Bill Mooney, a Catholic. And they went off and had their little life. They were very nice. She was wonderful. She was very funny. She passed of liver cancer, unfortunately, but she was class act. And Boo got, Marcia Neal was her real name. Boo, she got that nickname because her grandfather on her father's side in Georgia used to hold her as a baby and sing, "Oh, you beautiful doll, you great big beautiful doll." And it got down to, "Oh, you beautiful doll," and then it became Boo. So now she's Boo still, all these years later. She got married in 1955 to a gentleman who she's still married to, 63 years later. They met in the 5th or 6th grade when they were 11 years old. They just celebrated their 91st birthday, and they've known each other since that length of time. He was a career Navy man, a Annapolis graduate, and she became a Navy wife and did what all Navy wives do. Didn't care for it too much. She, when they moved out here to Albuquerque, she started making jewelry, Indian jewelry, and she was turning into a squaw before my very eyes. She and her partner, a gal, used to go off on the road and sell jewelry. I could just see them squatting by the road. I'm sure they didn't do that. But that created a sort of rift in their marriage for the first time. And she asked me to help her. I said, "Look at yourself. You're turning into a squaw." He's got this really cute little chick in his laboratory. He's making eyes at him. And she got the message, and they eventually worked through it and got back together. And they're still together. They're both in Alzheimer's now, unfortunately. But they're so sweet. They're just so sweet with each other. And it's sad but amusing at the same time, you know. My childhood was so-so. I don't remember a lot of it, but I was, I guess, a little bit of a show-off. And as I progressed through school, I got into drama, and I took voice lessons and singing lessons, and dancing lessons. I went into ballet class when I went into high school, which in the 50s was not a good thing, but I did it anyway. And graduated high school as the most talented male in the class, and then went to 2 years of college, and decided that I was not fit out for the scholastic life, and I left college my second year and went to New York. I got to New York in Labor Day weekend. I had two friends from Little Rock who had moved there and met me and took me in. I took the train up to New York from Little Rock, and I got there very early, I guess Saturday morning. And I had this incredible feeling when I arrived at Pennsylvania Station, came up, got on the sidewalk, and I had this overwhelming feeling that I was at home. I was where I was supposed to be. And I had given myself 2 years just to get a job in the theater. And my friends helped me find a one-room efficiency apartment, little kitchenette on 76th Street, Upper West Side. I got a job at the Manhattan Shirt Company. I was the only goy in the whole place, a lot of elderly Jewish men. And it gave me the funds to take dancing lessons at June Taylor Dance School. That was a big thing at that point. She was with Jackie Gleason. And I was taking 2 voice lessons a week, taking between 12 and 15 dance classes a week, and working, going home at night, having little dinners. The automat was my friend. I don't know if you remember the automat or not, but you go and you put in money and you get food out. I used to get a chicken pot pie for 25 cents, and that was my dinner. But eventually, Paul Gavitt, who was my voice teacher, introduced me to someone who got me a job in a bank as a teller, which I eventually got fired from because I was always late for work. But that was a good thing. I then got involved with a temporary agency that sent people out on temporary jobs. And I got a job with the Manhattan Bronx Cable and something corporation, Telegraph and Cable Corporation. They sold cables. And they wound up wanting to hire me permanently, but I was going to auditions. And in April of 1957, 56, 57, I auditioned for a summer stock job to be in the ensemble and got hired. So I became a member of Equity in April of 1957 and have been a member, paid up dues member ever since. My first musical director who hired me was John Kander, who was Kander and Ebb eventually, and wrote a lot of Broadway shows. I worked for them in one, Woman of the Year. Later on, that comes later. So I had my first job less than a year. I was very fortunate. I worked all that summer in stock. I wound up being a principal in the second show that I was doing because they jobbed in a guy who wasn't capable of singing the song. It was an operetta, Merry Widow. So I became a principal at that point, which was very good. And then I auditioned in New York. I got into the first revival of Most Happy Fellow, which was going to be at New York City Center, which was a sort of off-Broadway production. And That was in January of 1958. So I had given myself 2 years from September of 56, and I was appearing on Broadway in January of 1958. I was very impressed with myself. Not until recently have I realized how fortunate I was. But I went from that into Bells Are Ringing with Judy Holliday and Hal Linden, and went on tour with that. And we went to Washington, D.C. and L.A. and San Francisco. It was a wonderful tour. It was the year that the big ballet company from Russia was in, the Bolshoi Ballet. And it was the first time they had been there in years and years. And we got to see them on several occasions in San Francisco. It was very exciting. Let's see, and then I went back into New York. I auditioned for a show called Beg, Borrow, or Steal, which is about the, not the hippies, but the people who preceded the hippies, the beatniks. And it was starring Betty Garrett and Larry Parks, who had been blackballed in Hollywood as communists back in the 50s during the Joe McCarthy era. They were wonderful. It flopped. Unfortunately, it was my first Broadway show and it flopped. But then I went into, I can't remember. I was auditioning for two new productions, Unsinkable Molly Brown and Camelot. Hans Aller, who was the conductor for Camelot, was a very strict musician, and we had to do whole tone scales to audition and all this very intricate musician stuff. And I thought I'd never pass all that. And I wound up getting both shows, but I had gotten Molly Brown first. So they had offered me Roddy McDowell's understudy in Camelot. And I tried to get out of my Molly Brown contract to get into that, but they wouldn't let me. So that was a major turning point in my life, my career, because out of Molly Brown, the conductor, working with Tammy Grimes, later on I auditioned for a replacement in a show she was doing called High Spirits. And the conductor of High Spirits went down to, Tammy went down the bowling alley and told her to hire me. That led to my working with Bob Fosse in Sweet Charity, because the conductor was the same conductor. So it was all aligned. Had I gone to Camelot, Richard Burton, of course, was Welsh, and I probably would have gotten along with him, as a girlfriend of mine who was in the show did. She got taken to Paris for the Paris Opera on their private plane. It was wonderful. But that was a turning point in my life, that choice. And from then on, I never stopped working, actually. I've worked with very exciting people. I mentioned Bob Fosse, Judy Holliday, Meredith Willson in Molly Brown, who wrote the score, and Frank Lesser, who was the composer of Most Happy Fellow, which was my first show in New York. Also was the composer of Molly Brown as well. And I wound up working with him later on. So that was a big hit. So with that, I left that and went into, I can't remember what. My modus operandi was that I would go and hopefully get a Broadway show for the fall. And then I would go out and job out in summer stock doing lead roles, putting to use the stuff I had learned in my acting class. So that was a repetition thing until I wound up being featured on Broadway in Sweet Charity, and in Coco with Katharine Hepburn. And my last Broadway show was Rags, which was a semi-flop. And there are many shows in between there. I'm trying to think. Dear World, I worked with Angela Lansbury on that. And the two Bob Fosse shows. One called Pleasures and Palaces, which is based on a flop play called There Once Was a Russian, which Frank Lesser did as well. And we closed out of town. But a lot of that material went into Sweet Charity, which was his next show, which I also did. And he was, without a doubt, the best director I think I've ever worked with, because he utilized every bit of everybody's talent. He hired ensembles of really star people and featured people, and they were all competing against each other. So it made an incredibly exciting ensemble, a group of dancers, you know. I was working in Washington, D.C., and I was doing a show at Ford's Theater, where Lincoln had been shot, you know, and it was called All Night Strut. It was a musical variety show of the 30s, 40s, and 50s musicals. There was a quartet, 4 singers, and 12 dancers. And Frankie, I can't remember her last name, was very close with Kennedy. And that's how she wound up being the head of Ford's Theater. And they had just done a show called Your Arms Are Too Short to Box with God, which went from there to Broadway. And they were trying to do that with our show as well. But a lot of political figures came to see our production. And it was President Ford's last Christmas in office. Jimmy Carter and his wife had just been elected. And Betty Ford, who was a dancer, an ex-dancer herself, saw our show and wanted us to come to the White House and entertain. So they asked us to come and entertain in the East Ballroom at a big, big soiree of all the senators and their wives. There are hundreds of people there. And a little stage in the middle. And we did our thing. And Mrs. Ford thought we didn't get the proper respect that was due us. So she asked us back, I think the next week, to a much more intimate setting. And it was in the vestibule of the White House. The Marine Band was playing. We were invited to dinner and their eggnog. And their eggnog almost is as good as mine. It rivals. And we had a wonderful evening of dancing with Betty. And we did a conga line through the vestibules with her. And I have a wonderful photo of myself and her in my dining room. So, and also, while I was there, not at the same time, but a different time, I was ringmaster for a one-ring European-style circus in Washington, D.C. for 2 weeks. And I had auditioned for the job through a director friend in New York who was doing it. They had seen this female master of ceremonies, ring mistress from Europe, and they were going for a female, and they were going to hire her, but all she did was go here and here and here, and she was very dull, boring. So they hired me instead. And I was supposed to have a script. There was no script. I had to talk the audience through 2 hours of circus, literally, which meant I had to learn all of the acts and their specialties and when their particularly special thing was going to happen. And I went around to all of them and I interviewed them, sat down with them, learned their acts. I was nervous as hell. There was a Barnum Bailey program, but I couldn't use any of those phrases because they're patented to Barnum and Bailey. So I had to make up my own dialogue, which is fun. It worked out very well. I learned all of the acts. They were very complimentary. And at the end, circus people are very tight-knit. And if you're not circus, you're not part of the group. But I was very open-armed accepted by the end of the tour and had gotten a call the next season to be the ringmaster at Seven Flags in New Jersey. And I turned it down. Six Flags in New Jersey? What's one more flag it is? And that was that saga. The first day of rehearsal for starting a new show is very exciting. You meet everybody you're gonna be working with very intensely for the next 6 weeks at least before you open. And you all gather around, you have a seat, you have a read-through of the script, a playing of the music. Essentially, you're presented with the show. Then you start rehearsals. If you're in the, there used to be dancing ensemble and a singing ensemble. They're more together now than it used to be. So at that point, there were dancers and there were singers. So the dancers would go off with the choreographer and work on we would go off with the musical director and learn the singing, and the principals would go and work with the director on set. That goes on forever. And rewriting goes on, cutting goes on, additions goes on. And you keep working it until you get it right, hopefully. And it's when you don't get it right, it's normally the result of egos. And there's a clash of egos somewhere, or a disagreement of creative forces. Or they just get off the track in a wrong way. But it's a very interesting process to watch. You learn an incredible amount of craft. The craft of acting, the craft of dancing, and the craft of singing. They're all arts, they're all crafts. And each one has its own special thing. I was known as a triple threat because I could dance and sing and act. I wasn't so sure about the acting. I eventually, I think, gave myself more self-confidence in doing that. And I think that was with, I got acting reviews when I was much younger. I just didn't believe them. I was always told about reviews that a good review and 50 cents gets you to unemployment. And that's about the truth, you know. You're as good as your last job. And you think you're never going to work again. I had one bad year in 1964. I think it was. No, it wasn't. I can't remember. Anyway, I decided to go over Master Al and let my hair go gray. And didn't work for almost a year. Got courtesy callbacks and things like that, you know. Dyed my hair back, grew a mustache, and started working again. Fickle show business. You asked, what is acting? And what is it? It's pretend. I'm pretending. And there are good pretenders less pretenders. Some pretenders are more filled. And the idea is to immerse yourself into the character that you're portraying, utilizing as much of your own self as possible and relating to the character as yourself, and then assuming characteristics. The words are, as I say, the words are always the same. The words are always there. It's how you use to speak them in response to what's been said to you. It's an interchange. It's an ensemble. It's connection with everybody on stage in the play. That is established as you go along and as you rehearse with each other, and the characters start emerging, and the character start responding to what's happening, and you start thinking like your character, utilizing your own emotional being and physical being as to how that character works physically and emotionally. You build a background, delve into you create the character's past if it's not been given to you or if it's not in the script somehow. A good script writer is rare. The most fulfilled script that I have ever worked with for me was A Little Night Music by Stephen Sondheim. And absolutely, I played Frederick, the lawyer. And everything you need to know about that character is in that script. It's phenomenal. It was revelatory. Any question I had, I just had to read the script. Other scripts, you have to delve back and make up a past life that evolves into the character you're portraying, and likes and dislikes and stuff like that. The emotional content is what you're working with. Those are your tools. That's an actor's tools, or your emotions, and it's like being honest with yourself with your own emotions and truthful with yourself with your own emotions, that if you allow yourself to be vulnerable, and people don't know it's your emotions that you're using. You know, they just see an emotion being, they don't know the background of it. So it's teaching yourself to be safe and to be vulnerable and expose yourself wide open. And that's very difficult for a lot of people to do, you know? And it's the difference between, I guess, truth and presentational acting. You know, you show people who you are as opposed to being who you are. And it's very, very easy to tell the difference. I forgot an experience that I had early in my career. I had not become equity yet, and they were casting West Side Story. And Cheryl Crawford, who was a big dyke agent, had it in her office. She was handling it. And they were advertising for an 18-year-old tenor who had a high C. And I was 20, and I had a damn good B flat. And I kept calling. I wasn't equity. I kept calling and calling. And they finally I got an audition and went in and sang. Can't remember what I sang. Can't remember what it was. What my audition song was at that point. But as I was leaving, I heard Jerome Robbins say, "I like him." And that was the last. I went off to summer stock right after that. Cheryl Crawford threw the production out of her office. Somebody else took it up and they cast it while I was in summer stock. I did have an audition for a replacement for Larry. A couple of years later, I had I had driven to Little Rock. I had a Citroen, a French car at that point, and fun driving that, I tell you. And as soon as I got home, I got a call from my agent in New York saying, they want you to audition for West Side Story. And I thought, oh God, I won't get sleep. So I went to a doctor and I got a sleeping pill. And I took it, flew back, and the pill hadn't worn off. And they said I was lisping when I sang, and I didn't get it. So that was my other. I never got to do West Side Story. That's a regret. The other one was Don Quixote. What's that musical? Man of La Mancha. That's another role I always wanted to do, never got to do. As regrets. I regret that I was so naive in my career that things came too easy for me. I was very seldom ever out of work. I pushed myself at my level. I never aspired to be a star. All I ever wanted to do was work, and I achieved that. I'm still working. And I have been doing this for over 60 years, I guess, something like that. And made a living at it, which is very rare. And regrets, that was regret. I feel that I could have pursued greater heights in my career had I wanted to. And I don't know if I didn't want to or I was afraid to. You know, years later I thought, well, I'm afraid of success. But I have been successful and I'm scared. But there's a lot of psychology that goes into psychological mayhem in actors, and any entertainers, I think, because I always felt like I was a phony. I always felt, somebody's going to catch up with me, and they're going to expose that I'm what I am really. False, wrong. You don't belong here. I worked opposite some very big names, and I had to have had something going for me, I think. But I try to reconcile that in my maturity. I feel more secure with me. Then I got into movies, and now I'm back to I don't know shit. If I ever had a mentor in theater, here was Bob Herget, who was a wonderful director, choreographer. He did what's known as industrial theater. That means all the car shows and all the big corporation shows, and he mentored me in those. We met in Chicago when I was doing 1776, which was, I haven't talked about highlights. But anyway, Bob was my mentor, and he got me into directing and choreographing, and I was doing that for quite a while and doing industrial shows, making big bucks. It was good, and doing a show at the same time. I was doing a Woman of the Year with Lauren Bacall. That was a Kander and Ebb show. Goes back to Johnny Kander, who was my first musical director. It all ties in, it's weird. But they had called me to audition for Annie to do the part of the brother thing. I don't know who does Easy Street. And I was a standby for Woman of the Year for 4 roles. And we talked, and I said, this is how it should be. This is how it could be. If it was for the understudy, for the character. I said, if I have to go on for them, I'm cool here, and I can do this show. And if I have to, I worked it out somehow. They wouldn't interfere with each other. I worked it out so how they wouldn't interfere. And I almost got them convinced that I could do 2 shows at the same time. Didn't quite work out, but it was a good trying. I got metaphysics from my dad. I'm not a religious person, and I claim to be spiritual, whatever that means to whoever it is. I have a connection with some kind of force. That's all I can describe it. And I believe it's an energy, and I think you can connect into that energy and you become part of that energy. There is, I delved into Science of the Mind in New York. It's a religious thing. And the basis of it is there is one God mind. I am part of that God mind in action. Therefore, I am God. So you are part of God. You are God. Everyone is a part of the whole thing. And I could conceive that. And then I got into a book called In Search of the Miraculous, and then The Artist's Way. The Search of the Miraculous is philosophical and mathematical combination. Uspensky and Gurdjieff. Gurdjieff was a let me go back. Gurdjieff was a philosopher. Uspensky was a Russian mathematician. And it's combining the music of, it's based on the music of the spheres, the planets. It's all very musically oriented. As we live our lives in octaves. And in order to progress from 1 to 8, actually 1 to 7, you need percussions. You need an event in your life that's traumatic, maybe, that pushes you to the next level. But when you come to the level of 7, that's the end of that octave and the beginning of the next octave. And it takes a great shock to get you into that next octave. And if you don't do that, you go back and you build up again until you are successful in going to the next octave. And he equates our bodies as a horse and carriage, an empty carriage. It goes nowhere. There's nothing in it. You put a driver in, still you can't move. Then you put horses in, this is knowledge as you go along, and you start building a person, a being. And I reverse the horse, put the horses on first because there's no way to guide them. Then you have a driver who decides the course of action. And as you become more enlightened and more in tune with your universe or your energy source, you start filling up the carriage and you become the total. And then it becomes very complicated with higher mathematics in the planet, in the universal. I was not that bright to be able to do that, but I have adopted a lot of that philosophy from my life. And then in the artist's way, I believe her name is Cameron. It's artists become blocked. And in order to become unblocked, you've got to start reassessing who you are again. And she says that she didn't believe in God, but she uses it as an anomalum, God, meaning good, orderly design, good, orderly direction. And I could equate with that. And thinking of the Creator as we are the creation of the Creator, I could connect with that idea of being created by an artist. And to have a direct connection with that energy source or that energy teaching, you align yourself with that force and you become more creative and you rediscover who you are as a person. That's that in a nutshell. It's a little more complicated. But those are the things that have influenced my life. And hopefully I can carry that into my acting. And it gives it a basis of reality and of truth, perhaps, and connection with me in here and here. My relationship with this man, my husband now, my partner of 26 years, 28 years, I lose count. We just had our 28th anniversary, 29th, right? 28th. And we met at a gay group in Little Rock, a support group. And he came in with a couple of friends, mutual friends. This little thin, cute kid with glasses. And the friends we were with had just been married. And I thought, oh, what's this going on here? And we went out to dinner afterwards, as we normally did. And you sat next to me, right? And I didn't particularly care. I was not fond of him at all. I thought he was trying to break up my friends, and he took a liking to me, and he said that he had been seeing me since he was a kid, drawing pictures of me. Chop Daddy. And we eventually started talking, and we kept getting thrown in together through mutual friends. And I was told that he was interested in me, and I was not interested in any kind of relationship with that. After I just gotten out of a very bad one, and I thought he was very needy, and everything that I thought was a negative, he proved wrong. He proved me wrong, and I had been celibate for a long time, and when we finally got together, we laid on the floor. This is intimate. We laid on the floor all night long on a blanket and made love for 8 hours. And that was the beginning of it. And we've had our ups and downs. We both have problems. We both have idiosyncrasies and habits that we both have adapted ourselves to, and the one thing throughout the whole thing is that we love each other. We believe in each other, we trust each other, and we have faith in each other. And that's been weakened at times, but it's always been reestablished. We separated for a year. We both wanted to work through it. We both did therapy. We did counseling, and we've made it through 5 more years. We got married in 13. We have future battles to contend with, but we'll do them, and we'll be together.